Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your City Council informational meeting. It's Tuesday, February 12th. We'll call this meeting to order, and we'll start with a staff report by Jim David.
Good afternoon, councilors. Jim David, Operations Manager for the City Council. Today marks the 22nd day of the 40-day session. The deadline for bill introductions has passed, and as you can see in the graph, there were about 272 bills introduced in the House and 188 in the Senate. This is about the 10-year average. What makes this session unique is the 46 vehicle shell bills proposed. By comparison, only 9 of these bills were offered last year. There are several bills that we are currently monitoring. Some examples include House Bill 1048 that has sailed through the legislature without objection. This bill would allow an executive session for the purposes of discussing internal security measures. It now awaits consideration by the governor. House Bill 1120 establishes a Forest Health and Resilience Fund to be administered by the State Department of Agriculture. This bill has the potential to provide state assistance when it comes to EAB remediation. This bill is awaiting action on the House floor. Senate Bill 105 and House Bill 1251 diverts 10% of the Tourism Promotional Fund to subsidize horse racing in Fort Pierre and Aberdeen. According to the Department of Tourism, this form of racing has seen significant reductions in revenue over the years. In communications with our CVB here in Sioux Falls, I learned that this bill, if approved, would cut state funding to the CVB by about $133,000. Senate Bill 105 is scheduled for a hearing on Thursday in Senate Appropriations. Senate Bill 106 would allow a 1% bed, booze, and board tax or entertainment tax on lodging establishments and alcoholic beverages. Revenue generated by this tax would be designated by law enforcement or designated for law enforcement, judiciary, and incarceration costs. This item was included in the city's legislative priorities. Senate Bill 117 would require non-commercial license and permit applications and exams be in Spanish in addition to English. This item is being championed by the Sioux Falls Area Chamber of Commerce and also supported in the city's priorities. It awaits action on the Senate floor. The next big milestone in the legislative calendar is February 22nd, when every viable bill must be out of committee, and then on the following day it has to be out of the House of Origin. Both chambers must have their bills out on that day, on February 23rd. And just a reminder that the last legislative coffee is going to be scheduled for February 23rd for Districts 6, 9, and 14. This year they are being held at Southeast Tech in a building called The Hub at 10 a.m. And if you're interested in visiting the LRC's website, the website address is listed here, sdlegislature.gov. You can set up a bill track list if you'd like. If you need any help with that, I'd be more than happy to provide any assistance. And I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions for Jim? Councilor Staley.
Jim, since you're the expert on everything that's happening in Pierre, just reassure us here that there is no motion, there's no energy, within any bills to tweak this public input that was passed, where you have public input at every meeting mandated. Has there been any movement towards addressing that in any way?
So Senate Bill 91 that is being proposed right now, and it made it out of, I believe when we were actually present at Municipal Day at the legislature, it actually passed out of committee. What this would do is it would set a minimum standard that public input must be allowed at regular meetings of the governing body. So it could be the school board, it could be the county commission, it could be the city council. So it sets a minimum floor. And basically from there it defers to local bodies. As you recall, the city council had adopted a policy that would allow 5 minutes for public input, maximum of 15 minutes for informationals, working sessions, committees, and meetings such as that. So any change here locally would have to be done by this body. However, they did stipulate that there would be a minimum threshold for public comment at those regular meetings, and that is Senate Bill 91.
And my understanding is the reason we even broadened the ability to do public input was because of the action of the legislature.
Correct.
Last year. So if they're going to retract that mandate, then there is a chance that our city council will follow suit and revisit that whole issue.
It is the city council's discretion on how they would follow.
And I would hope we wouldn't do that. And so that means we could withdraw the ability to speak at informationals from city.
It would take a vote of the city council to make that happen.
Right, but could the city council vote to take public input totally away from
If a
the 7
majority of the
o'clock?
city, if the majority of the city council approved a resolution changing that, you are correct.
And is the municipal league supporting this action?
Senate Bill 91, yes, they are.
Okay, I would not be supporting that action at all. And I thought that we were doing, and maybe Councilor Erickson can comment on this because she's been involved with it. Have you been working on this at all?
Nope, I have not.
The other thing I thought I thought there was going to be some kind of an energy to address things like the mayor's state of the city address, so that we wouldn't, kind of a public meeting wouldn't have public testimony.
That is included in this bill also. If you have a swearing-in ceremony, it does exempt those events from public comment.
Because right now they are.
As written, it would.
Could the city right now, could we pass an ordinance that would limit public input at those events?
There's nothing in Senate Bill 91 that would restrict the city council's ability to handle public comment in however way it feels necessary, with the exception of those regular meetings. Okay. So if the city council wanted to have public comment at an installation ceremony, it could. Okay. Now, to kind of go back with what you had passed in the procedures manual, it did not stipulate anything about installation ceremonies or any type of ceremonial type meeting. It addressed informationals, working sessions, and committees.
Yeah, Mike, I will probably need to reach out to the to Yvonne Taylor, but my concern is with this body of elected officials, if the state says you don't have to have public input anymore, that there'll be an inclination here to try to get rid of it. So if this Senate Bill 91 doesn't pass, then we still are protecting the citizens' right to speak at these different meetings, correct? Nothing will change. If Senate Bill 91 doesn't pass, nothing changes from the way it is now.
It's mandated by the state.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
I will just chime on to that. While I haven't been directly involved, I've seen the drafts. They did sit down with the Newspaper Association, who has also given their blessing, which is a huge hurdle to overcome, because the intent is not to restrict public comment by the Municipal League or the Newspaper Association. It covers all of the open meeting laws. It's really, we in Sioux Falls have always enjoyed having a more liberal, more robust public comment section. What it really was trying to address is making sure at a budget address that the mayor gives, the state of the city address, installation ceremonies, those more ceremonial things, that public comment won't be taken for that, which really makes sense. How odd is it when the mayor gives a swearing-in ceremony, when we do that and there's public comment? It just is not really makes sense. The other thing is that it does is it protects us from being able to attend all functions where public policy could be discussed, where no decisions are being made. So for example, when we go to the CVB luncheon or the tourism luncheon and things like that, how the law was passed last time, there was kind of some areas where we were sitting at other tables and trying to really minimize any contact within a quorum. And so some of those things were addressed in this bill as well, just making sure that we are all able to get the information that we need to get and attend things that we're able to attend, while someone may talk about an issue which we didn't have any control over, but I was sitting in the audience. And again, I just want to make sure that while I was in Pierre, I did sit down and talk to the folks from the South Dakota Newspaper Association, and while they did not speak for it, they were in favor of it, and they essentially helped write and draft it with Yvonne, and really went back and forth, as well as the school districts and others that would be impacted So I just want to make it clear that for me, I don't see us going back and changing anything, and I don't want anyone speaking on my behalf saying that we are going to change anything and cause everyone in a frenzy, because that's just not the case. We just needed more clarification. It was kind of a loosely written law that had some unintended consequences that we needed to get more clarification on for our attorneys and for all of us. If there's anything you want to add to that, Jim, go ahead.
You know, it's one of those areas with public comment and how that bill was passed. And the question was, if you attend a chamber annual meeting or Good Morning Sioux Falls and they're discussing street projects, then are you therefore, do you need to allow public comment at a meeting that you do not run and is not your meeting? And so it's stipulated that what you need to do as a governing body is you need to post those events on a notice of public meeting and then have it online. And so, but it recognized the fact that you as the governing body cannot compel the Chamber of Commerce to provide public input at that meeting. And so it did clarify matters like that.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sure.
Well, first of all, let me just say that if the newspaper association thinks it's a good thing, it sounds like everybody's weighing in on this except the citizens who might be doing the testifying. So in that instance, I think we need to protect their right to have input. More input, in my opinion, is better. But the other thing, I'm not sure how I see us sitting together at a table, how that kind of weaves itself into this as far as public input goes. I will say I was the one who suggested that when we have these meetings where we all get together for a nice dinner sponsored by the chamber, that we aren't all sitting together at a table, because business can happen. So I think they started breaking us apart, and I think that makes sense, that we're not all coming together. I don't think that's healthy for the citizenry to have us coming together in little groups to talk, or quorums to talk about innocent things, but who knows what's going to happen, especially if, well, okay. Anyway, so I still say that I think more public input is better, and I've got it. Maybe, Jimmy, you could kind of get that bill to us so we can see exactly what that's saying. Thank you.
All right, next item up. Any other? Go ahead, Councilor Neitzer.
I just want to say that I take exception to the characterization that this body is inclined to limit public input if we have the power. We all care about public input. We just disagreed on a couple of details, 3 minutes or 5 minutes. That's it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we will move on to the committee commission reports. Operations Committee, Councilor Marshall Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to defer on this to Councilor Neitzer because the meeting was about 90% the Councilor Neitzer report on that. He did a nice job, and I thought I'd have him probably pick out what he thought were the highlights.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Okay, thank you. I brought 3 items to the Operations Committee. The first was what I call a staff certification policy. It was a draft, and working with the audit organization and working with one of our auditors, found that we really have nothing in writing that discusses what will we pay for in terms of getting certifications. So for example, our clerks, the MMC and the CMC, and then for our auditors, it could be a CPA, a CGAP, or a CIA. It's just been kind of done essentially unofficially on a handshake in the past. And so I wrote up a proposed policy that would go into what would be reimbursable and what we would pay for, so everybody would know going in what we would support. It doesn't require certification, but it encourages it, and it essentially just makes that statement that we want to help you grow if you want to go there, and if it's applicable to your work, we want to help support you, and this is how we'll do it. Got some good commentary. I'll make some edits and probably bring it back to another operations committee or another venue that would end up in the operations manual if the city council approved it. Number 2 was the hiring process for internal audit staff. That was really just a discussion where I proposed really the draft procedure by which we hire an internal audit manager. That's now been sent to the full city council. It was really just to kind of bounce ideas off and get an idea. Again, we don't have, and this is something that could go into a manual at some point. We've done it essentially more or less kind of the same way in the past from what I can tell, but there's nothing really written down. Once again, just trying to memorialize and enshrine something. And then the last item I had was a quick talk about the audit staff organization. That would be an update to our flow chart or our reporting chart, and that really comes out of the adoption of our ordinance updating audit. And essentially it would show that the internal audit manager for personnel and financial purposes would report to the operations chair just as every other employee. So audit is kind of rolled in and reporting to the same place, but they would keep their functional day-to-day reporting to the audit chair and the audit committee. And then I know Jim David also gave a quick update on our remodeling downstairs so we can get our staff together. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions for Councilor Neitzer? Seeing none, the next item is the South Dakota Municipal League Board of Directors. That was on Tuesday before we all got before everyone arrived to Pierre. I did leave extra early to spend the morning in during some committee meetings, as well as our board meeting was at 2 o'clock that day. We discussed the remainder of the meeting schedule for the board. Our new business was Yvonne brought in a few of the different secretaries to discuss the vision for their departments and a couple of seasoned secretaries, as well as some new secretaries. Darren Berquist from the DOT spoke, Steve Perner from DENR. He provided a wonderful contact sheet if anyone ever has questions as far as things that impact the environmental department there. Jim Twirlinger, I always say his last name wrong, with Department of Revenue is the new, he's really doing double duty right now and coming over to Revenue full-time here soon, and seeing his vision. A lot of the conversation with him circled around liquor licenses, and that topic was the big topic. And then Secretary Steve Westra, who is from Sioux Falls, the Secretary for GoEd, talked a lot about economic development statewide, what it means for each municipality, whether you are a city of 300 or a city of 170,000. The last two were really energizing, knowing two new folks that are taking their posts and just how they plan to work with the different municipalities. It was this first time we've done that, so that was nice. We had a legislative discussion, much like what Jim just presented, and then we also talked about a couple of city impact studies that the league has decided to do, digitizing municipal data, as well as another one. One of them they are going forward with, the other they are not. It will be shared throughout the league as well. Director's report, she talked a little bit about what happened with the situation on the House floor, and how she has full lobbying efforts back on and is here representing all municipalities. From there, we adjourned and went to the legislative briefing at Drifters, followed by the rib dinner, and had a great turnout with many different legislators from the Sioux Falls area, as well as the other municipalities. And then the following day, we spent the morning during session and watched a few bills that were taken up. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to City Council open discussion. Any open discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to Long Range Transportation Plan, the upcoming process. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Sam Trebelcock, City of Sioux Falls Planning. With me this afternoon also is Shannon Austin with City Engineering, Jeff Schmidt with the Planning Office, and then also Jim Feeney with the Metropolitan Planning Organization to help answer questions as we have some time here. So we wanted to do this because we're in the process of starting up our long-range transportation planning process. In this case, it's the 2045 long-range transportation plan. I know that seems a long ways out in the future, but it is certainly something we feel it's very important for us to take a look at into the future to find out what we're going to be needing that far into the future. So what we want to talk about today is why this plan is important, when the plan will be completed, which is starting here very, very soon, and how the public will be engaged in this process, and then take your questions and comments as we go through that as we're just starting the process. So why is the plan important? The purpose of the plan is to guide multimodal, so the different modes, the different ways of getting around, whether it's cars or pedestrians, bike, transit. It can even be, airports. Planning activities through the year 2045 for the entire MPO area. So that map to the right, a little hard to read, but we're not just looking at Sioux Falls, we are looking at the metropolitan area. So that includes also the communities of Harrisburg and Brandon and T and Hartford, Minnehaha County, Lincoln County, State DOT, we all get together. Some of you are also involved in that in the Urbanized Development Commission. So this is your long-range plan, the Urbanized Development Commission's long-range plan. We're updating, as you can see in the bottom right, the current plan, which is the 2040 plan. It was done a little over 4 years ago, and that process begins to update it now. So the intent of the plan is to determine what projects need to be done, what studies need to be done out into the future, what sub-plans need to be done. I'll talk a little bit more about what those include. Those can be for the different modes or for the different projects that you're going to be looking at doing. And then what goals should we be living by? What objectives and goals to plan for the future? And then how are we going to pay for all this? And that's kind of one of the trickiest things we do in this plan. So the components of the plan, there's actually a few things, and that's why we're starting it now. Starts now in January 2019 and would complete no later than November in 2020. So it's about a 2-year project, not quite that long. But there, like I said, there's 2 different components. We're starting that process now with the 2019 Market Research Survey. Now we've been doing this for 20 years, and it includes statistically valid surveys of residents and employers, not just within Sioux Falls, but the entire metropolitan planning organization area. And we also do stakeholder interviews and focus groups. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. This is one of our main ways to get public engagement through this process, especially in the early phases of it. Also, as part of this process, we update our traffic model, and that's a tool used by cities, MPOs, and the state DOT to estimate future traffic and evaluate streets or highway impacts. So we use it a lot in a long-range plan. We do what we call a recalibration every 5 years as part of this planning process to make sure it's as accurate as possible. And we project it out to the year 2045. And we look all the way out to 2045 because when you're completing a project, especially a street project, you want to make sure that you're looking at your needs and capacity needs when you're building that roadway, or what your future right-of-way needs are going to be. So we need to look that far in the future because we're using the taxpayer money. We want to use it as wisely as possible, and that traffic model helps us do that. The long-range transportation document, that'll be something that'll start taking place later this year into near the end of 2020. And that provides detailed recommendations about the methods to improve Sioux Falls MPO transportation system. And then this will include recommendations for new methods to improve all modes of transportation into the future. So we'll bring in a consultant. They'll help us take a look at some recommendations. What are other places doing? What are some of the new trends we should be looking at now? And what are some of the things into the future? And how can we bring that here to Sioux Falls? What are the best things for us to be looking at? And how does that come into what we found in that market research survey? And then how does that plan in with our traffic model? All of these things play in together into that document. So how we engage the public, again, one of the most important tools that we have is that market research survey that we start up here this year. So that'll finish out this summer. And it'll include those stakeholder interviews and those statistically valid surveys. Typically, we get about 1,000 that we survey residents throughout the MPO area. We get about 300 employers. Some of the questions that we ask are the same, so we have a good track record of being able to compare those things, and some of them are different depending on our needs. As part of UDC members, those are things that you'll be able to take a look at and review as we go through the process, and we've talked about already at the last meeting. This is our way that we find out what the public needs and is looking at for the future. And so we're gauging the public by finding out very clearly what a statistically valid survey will tell us. We're not just looking for who shows up to a meeting. We have a really hard time, especially lately, getting the public involved in long-range plans. So we're going out to them with this statistically valid survey, these focus groups, and some other methods to try to do that right up front. And we really find it's been really successful, and we'll certainly share those results as we get into this, into the summer. We'll inform the public, of course, of that research study and during the MPO meetings, and we'll certainly take your input on how you want to see us get the information out to the public about that. The other ways we engage the public throughout the process, we want to do that through either, it might be open houses, social media, news releases, news stories, throughout the MPO process, the meetings that we have a public hearing at the end that's required. And again, we would take your input in methods that we need to keep the people engaged throughout this entire process. Now this kind of gives you a flow chart of a road project, how it starts, and it tells you a little bit of the importance of the long-range plan. It's certainly a part of this process. It's one of the first things that we use as part of when we're putting a road project together. It needs to be in the long-range plan. And then you start finding ways that you can budget for it into your capital improvement program. And then you go through the engineering and the design and the construction. But there's a lot, and you see it in the yellow boxes that are in between that. And that's the things that we want to highlight. When we're putting something into the plan, we're doing that early on because there's so much to do between now and when the construction takes place. And that includes in the upper left-hand corner, there's some special studies that you have to go through. And that includes things like, as I was talking about earlier, sub-plans and corridor studies. So we do a lot of different corridor studies. Once you know the project you need to do, if it's important and it's going to improve, how are you going to do that? And so we go through these corridor studies, such as the I-229 corridor study. That was important for us to look at, and it came out of some of the things that we needed as part of the long-range plan. Also sub-plans, those are things that we do for some of our other modes, like the bicycle plan or the transit development plan. Those are things that we also look at in greater detail based upon what we're finding is some of the guiding objectives and goals within the long-range plan, so they're consistent. So this is from our current plan, the 2040 plan, and these are all the projects that we're looking at trying to complete by the year 2040. And so we put them into 5-year increments, and they all have to be what you call constrained. And Shannon can talk more about this in detail, but we're required to do that, but we do that by making sure that we look at the historical revenues that come in, and then we can get a pretty good idea what projects we can do in those 5-year increments. You can see there's some projects that go beyond that, go beyond 2040. Those were plans, road projects we could not constrain. One major one that you'll see is like the South Dakota 100, the south side. We were not able to constrain that project, budget for it, figure out how to pay for it. And that's a big challenge for us as we move forward. That's just one of the major things for us to be looking at as we move forward. Because we see that in our traffic model, how important that is for our other projects, our congestion that we see out to the year 2045. How are we going to get to that done? We also show it even into the detail of each project, what the cost is going to be, what it will be into the future. So we are planning for it. Gives us a pretty good idea what we're coming up against. And then we can start program those things into the CIP. So the ones that you will see in the orange row in the 2021 to 2025, that's the projects we're sliding into trying to get into the capital improvements plan. And the projects that are further out, those are plans that we're studying for and doing corridor studies for. So really important tool for us to move forward and figure out what we're going to do for road projects. And then, like I said, the same thing goes for the other plans when we do our sub-plans. With that, I've covered a lot of things in little detail. I certainly want to give you some time to ask questions about any of this.
Thank you, Sam. Any questions for Sam? Councilor Sale?
Yes, thanks, Sam. It's very detailed. On your assumptions for these costs, your 2016 costs, and as you run them out, what rate of inflation are you using for those costs in construction?
Yeah, I think we were looking at 2% costs that we were drawing out on inflation from the last plan. And we'll look at that for this plan too. We'll look at what the historical and averages have been over the past, and then determine a rate for the upcoming years too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sam?
Yes.
Councilor Starr?
Thank you. Sam, help me, because I'm trying to understand how this fits in then with what we're doing with the Bloomberg study and the task force that's working. How does, if you're not going to have results from what the public needs, how are we solving the public transportation necessities, or how does that fit in with the plan that we're trying to do, or how are you putting these two projects together?
Well, let me say that some of that's already taken place. We did a ridership survey ahead of this, I think in part knowing that some of this was coming. So that ridership survey will help us. So the results of that have we just talked about that with our Public Transit Advisory Board at the last meeting. So, and then also beyond that, we want to know what the residents think. And we have, of course, we already have survey information from the last plan. And we know that as this continues, this information is always good as we continue to find ways to improve our transit system or any other mode of transportation. So,
are we close to, I didn't see anybody else that's leading the group from the Bloomberg part of it. Do we see any update coming anytime soon to the council, or where they're headed, and what, even a preliminary of putting the group together? And I believe they have a consultant from Chicago that Bloomberg's paying for to help facilitate that group. And will we see anything anytime soon?
Well, right now we're going out there and we're talking to people that ride the system, people that work within the system, that have clients, and really trying to find, it's a lot about what we call human-centric design. That's what Bloomberg is teaching us, in trying to find ways to, what the people need that are utilizing it or need it, how we can truly improve the system for those people. So we're really in that stage right now, and that's what I can kind of tell you so far, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sam? Councilor Staley?
Sam, excuse me, I got kind of a cold going on here. This Bloomberg thing, tell us how, I guess I've requested from the mayor several times that he give us an update of what this Bloomberg thing even is. I'm not sure the public understands how we're being influenced by the Bloomberg Institute, or is it Mayor Bloomberg, or what is this?
Okay, so, Councilor Starr talked about it a little bit there is a consulting team that has come in, not only from Chicago, but from other locations as part of the Harvard Bloomberg study. They're helping us, lead us through this process. And that includes, methods to try to find information from those people through this human-centric design process. And then also we're going to, based upon the results of that engagement with those people, start to identify solutions. And we haven't gotten there yet by any means. So we're kind of still in the early stages of that. That's probably why you haven't heard a lot about it yet. But certainly I would encourage you to continue to ask us, to provide updates.
Well, I definitely have asked,
yeah.
but I'm not receiving.
The updates, I can tell you.
One more thing, let me just ask this. Sure. Are these Bloomberg people actually coming physically here? When we talk, we've got this Bloomberg thing going on. Do they have people who have come and are staying in our city? Are they coming here to meet with you guys, or?
They've been here once,
and
then we've had phone conference calls with them every so often. And I can't remember how many times they're here, 2 or 3 times.
And how many people do you know have gone there to see them?
Well,
people from your...
so I couldn't tell you there's nobody here as part of the core team process yet that has gone there.
Jason Reisdorfer.
Director Reisdorfer oversees the Bloomberg. Sam is a part of the core team, but this is really facilitated out of the mayor's office. So I don't know that Sam's maybe the best person to.
But he's talking about, I'm just wondering, you know, the energy we're talking about bringing these two things together, right? So I think the public wants to know, they have a right to know where the information is coming from. And so we're going outside of what we've done in the past, right, Sam? We're breaking out of the ideas from the past before the mayor was elected.
Yes.
And we're bringing in the Bloomberg influence, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, the Bloomberg's different than the long-range strategic plan for transportation, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're talking about two different things here, because essentially we've taken this whole conversation to Bloomberg, which essentially is really a whole different conversation than talking about the long-range transportation. I do think they are related, they are commingled. I have talked to the administration. They are coming to give updates as necessary when they have something to report, but it does take time. We didn't get into this transit issue overnight. It's going to take a long time to get us out of it. What we're talking about here is the roads, the overpasses. Where are we putting in roundabouts if we're going to do roundabouts? Where are we putting in an overpass versus an interchange and working with the federal government? It's a very different conversation than the Bloomberg conversation, which I see that they're still commingled and related, and we will get an update. But my question, I'm sorry, anybody else have questions for Sam? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to address that. I just want to make sure we have two different things being presented.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I guess I'd update that a little bit. This is our entire transportation plan. It does include public transportation. It does include all of those things that the Bloomberg Group is studying. It's not separate. It's part of the entire thing as we're putting a plan together for all transportation relating from bicycle traffic. It includes public transportation. It includes public transportation for disabled and elderly. It's our entire plan. So to say that it's separate is a stretch. It's got to be included in the overall thing that we're looking as our community grows. It's not just roads and highways and street transportation. It also includes trucking. It also includes air travel. It includes, you know, that's why I'm surprised there's no one from the airport authority as part of this. You know, I mean, we're trying to put a plan together, but again, the update doesn't include we always think of transportation as how we get to work in our cars and how we get to the grocery store and school and those things, but it's so much more than that. Sam spends a ton of time doing these things, and he spent his career doing this, so saying that it doesn't include the public transportation part of it is probably a little off.
Well, and it's a component in the long-range transportation plan. It's like the bicycle, if we were going to say we're going to address just bicycles. So it's a component within this plan, but it's not the plan for that. And I know Sam's a part of the core team, and I know you've been meeting in that, but we'll get Jason, Director Reisdorfer, as well as anybody else that needs to be here to either send an email update or come in front of us for that component of it. My question to you would be is how amendable is this long-range plan as we do have changes coming forward on the Bloomberg? How amendable is this plan if we have a bunch of changes on the busing system and we decide to go a whole different route? How is that amendable?
Well, I mean, I think the long-range plan that we're doing now will be making sure that we do things in concert with what that's bringing forward and whatever comes out of that. So those are things that the long-range plan has to adjust to all the time. That's why we do it every 5 years. So certainly I think it's coming at a good time for that, what you're talking about. We shouldn't have to amend it. We should just be able to roll it in, what we're working on, because this document will be completed at the latter part of 2020. So I think we're at a good time for that.
Any other questions for Sam? Thank you, Sam. Appreciate you being here. Is there anyone else from your department there that needed to address the council? Nope. Okay. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. The next item is the PRA consultant agreement for the triage center. Welcome, Director.
Hi, everybody. Jill Franken, Public Health Director with the City of Sioux Falls. I'm here today to bring you some background as to the purpose of the agreement that's on the consent agenda tonight. The agreement is with Policy Research Associates, and it's specifically to engage the expertise of Travis Parker, who will work with our community to advance the Community Triage Center project concept through its now second phase, which I'll elaborate on in a moment. Leading this initiative are a number of people, but one here today to answer any questions you might have and to make a few comments is Erin Surska with the Minnehaha County Program Development. She's the Program Development Officer. We have Commissioner Karski, who's here, who's been very involved in this project. Councilor Erickson has been very involved on the policy committee for this project. Carrie Benz has been leading this effort up as the director of Minnehaha County Human Services, as well as Mayor Paul Tenhaken's been involved with this, and myself, and others, many, many others who have served on both the policy and operations committees, not just from the city and not just from the county, but from the community at large, a number of individuals. To take you back just a bit, most of you may recall that Erin came and briefed the city and the county back in July at your joint city-county meeting. She gave a really nice overview of where we were at to date with the Triage Center project. She explained that phase 1 of the project was complete and that we are embarking on consideration for how to move forward with phase 2 of the project. This contract then is that next step. So this phase is to develop the implementation plan for this project, and that's what PRA is going to help us with. It's for a voluntary, just to remind you, it's for a voluntary mid-level care alternative for those with substance use disorder or mental illness who are not violent in behavior. To quote Erin from the meeting in July, the Triage Center is to act as a pivot point for people with substance use disorder and mental health issues, for them to be assessed, for them to be stabilized, and then to seek a place to refer them to for care that they may need. This is not intended. This is really created, this Triage Center, and this concept is based on a gap that we've identified in our community. And so it's not to serve as a replacement for services that are being provided, but rather to augment and be able to provide an additional access point for people to be able to gain access to mental health services or addiction services. And it's to really work to better coordinate care and to improve the outcomes of the individuals that'll be served. So this contract that's on the consent agenda tonight is actually to be able to allow us the opportunity to have this next phase implemented. The deliverables on the contract itself is to really provide some advice on oversight structure, so to really advise on what does the governance of this look like. This is something that a lot of folks have been wrestling with on the policy side. As you know, this is a new model of how we're operating in the city. Not one entity has really been taking this on, but it's rather been a collaborative of many entities, both public and private. So what does that need to look like as a governance for this oversight? And then working with us as a community on developing an RFP or the operating agreement for this to be able to implement this project and to make those recommendations. Travis is someone who's got a vast amount of experience and expertise in this area and is from the Midwest area, and so understands this area and understands and is going to be able to help advise us in that. He's also going to help us with what do the operations need to look like for behavioral health and substance use assessment and those very early interventions. What are the meat on the bones of the concept report that has already been, and the concept plan that's been put together? How do we add to that and make that a little bit more specific as far as the operations and how this will be conducted? And then just some financial considerations that need to be taken as well, maybe getting a little bit more specific on how much this is, what do we need to be looking at for a budget for this project more specifically, as well as what are some policy issues that we may have around being able to maximize reimbursement opportunities through the services that are provided. So this next phase of the work is possible through funding sources from Avera and Sanford that have come together and have said we are willing to help support bringing PRA here and to do this next phase of the work. So we as a health department are serving as a place for that funding to be received, and then for us to be, as a city, to be able to help get that contract implemented. So, so that's why you're seeing both the consent agenda for the agreement from the city, but you're also seeing tonight a first reading for those funds to be received. So there's no city funding, no health department existing budget that will be used, but we'll be supplementing with those dollars. I hope that kind of helps add some information for you before tonight. It's been said before, but I think it bears repeating, and that is that this is really a new program for our community, as I mentioned before, and this is requiring us to look at this a whole new way. And there's a lot of smart people here that we've done a lot of good work thus far to come to this point with this triage center concept, but we really need some expertise to get us through this next time period here. The city decided to step up and fill that gap of being the entity that could do this part of the work right now, but make no mistake, there's a lot more work to come, and it'll take a lot of us to be able to make that happen. So I think I'd like to just have Aaron come up for just a moment here and share a little bit more about Travis Parker and what he's also doing to work with us in some other areas with the city, and then we can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, Aaron.
Good afternoon, Erin Surska, Minnehaha County Commission Office, and I'm here to tell you a little bit more about Travis. I've gotten to know Travis pretty well with his work over the past few years. Some of folks in our community from the triage groups were invited and participated in a 2-day kind of strategic planning session called the Sequential Intercept Mapping. If you go to the Minnehaha County website under the Community Triage Center project link, you can actually see our sequential intercept map and full report. And what that is it took each criminal justice decision point, identified what services we have for behavioral health, which is mental health and substance use disorders folks, at each intercept and in between. So we were able to identify the resources we had and any gaps, and Travis was the leader of that workshop. Who he works for is PRA, and they have a non-for-profit arm called PRI. And PRI is really connected nationally. I've seen them present at various national conferences. They have national contracts with SAMHSA. In fact, they have the contract to implement the sequential intercept mapping. They're helping plan nationwide behavioral health conferences, bringing experts together, as well as policy academy. So they're good at operations level and policy level. So we're very fortunate and lucky to be able to work not just with Travis, but all of PRA. One of the strategic partners of the MacArthur Foundation is PRA. We had the MacArthur Foundation Innovation Grant to get us through the first phase of this, and we were awarded subsequently the next level of funding for MacArthur work. So Travis and his entity is very familiar with our area, our community, and our needs. So with that, any questions?
Okay. We'll turn it over to the council. Any questions? Councilor Sale?
Comment, please.
Yes.
I would just like to commend all those people that have worked on this so hard. The more I see of this, the more it's very impressive. It's one of the things that fly underneath the radar. It doesn't catch the headlines and doesn't make the 6 o'clock news, but I believe it will have significant impact in our community when it's implemented for those people that are out there, for the whole healthcare community. And so I commend those people that have been involved in that county commission and the city council members and all the staff that they put the time into it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Starr?
Thank you. More for Director Franken, if you don't mind. Thanks, Aaron. I'm curious about the process of how the grant or the donation to the city comes, and do we is there an agreement between the donors and the city to what they're expecting for their donation, or is it just a how do we do that kind of thing? Because I'd love to see us do more of it, more than anything, but.
Well, that's a really good question, Councilor Starr, because that's something that we really had to talk about and kind of strategize. between the finance department and myself and the city attorneys, we just had to say, okay, and the health systems themselves, we kind of had to say, okay, what comes first? We got to write this agreement, but we need to take in this money, and how will we do that? So really, it's just sort of been by all of us putting our heads together and saying, how do we make this happen? So we actually invoiced them, to be very operational, simply sent them an invoice. They signed that they agree that this will be the purpose that it's used for, which was stated on the invoice, so kind of serves as sort of a written agreement, if you will. And so those dollars should be coming any day. Both of them have well agreed, and I know that the invoices for both Avera and Sanford are in process. And so that's just simply how we had to, make that work. So then decided we'd supplement our budget, and then we'll be the ones to get the contract going. But it's certainly a community agreement, and these are community assets that, really we're just helping to make sure we're facilitating making this happen.
Awesome, thank you. If I could, Madam Chair, just one more.
Yep.
Do you have an estimate of how much staff time that your department's invested in this program? Not that it's a downside, but that's the whole reason we bring consultants in, is because staff is busy with current activities and things. So administering this, obviously you've decided that you have the resources to be able to do that in the management part and the trying to think of the committee that you're using that's kind of doing this as well, like you had stated earlier, that it's more than just your department doing this. So I guess, is there some kind of estimate of how it fits in with what your department does?
Well, there's kind of two pieces to that maybe. First off, there's been several of us from my department, but also other departments with the city that have been involved between the policy and the operations committee. But that's part of our work. That's just something I would expect that we would be involved in. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, or just really the logistics of getting this kind of activity to happen.
More when you ask for the next FTE, I want to encourage that part of it as part of the budget. So it was more of a outside thing. If you have the staffing available to do these kind of things going forward, or if this is somewhere where you make that request that, are there additional staff coming as part of not only the triage, but other community?
Well, and I want to be clear, we are not indicating that because this is coming out of our department, this contract, that we will be owning the triage center and that it'll be part of the city of Sioux Falls even. This is a community project, and that's why the governance is so important that we figure that out, because this is going to require a model. I've been, you think about Metro 911 and how the city and the county had to come together to form a governance oversight of that work, so governance is going to have to be specific around this too. So I don't want you to get, think that this is going to be a City of Sioux Falls project, but I will be helping to do whatever I can from a administrative standpoint, from the city's perspective, operationally, helping to make sure things move through so we have the resources we need when we need them to keep this community conversation going and the work happening at a community level.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I do think the city does need to do all we can to help on this as it goes forward. I would probably reiterate a number of Councilor Sales' comments as far as compliments on laying the groundwork for this. I've been kind of getting a little bit involved with it and trying to learn more as we go, and I know it's a huge project as it comes together. And again, as Councilor Sale had said, I think it's something that's been flying under the radar a bit, but not only does this fly under the radar, but the subjects that this triage center is going to pretty much tackle head on always seems to fly under the radar, and that needs to change too. So I think, full forward and full throttle, whatever we can do to help. As far as the timeline goes, I think I've asked you about this a bit too, but we're not even looking, probably, even if the city, whatever they would help with, that's not even coming around in this budget cycle, is it? We're still a ways off into next year. Am I getting way far ahead here, or just trying to get a timeline?
That's a good question, and just to go to what Councilor Starr said too, myself is able to act as project manager for this, for the contract and for the work, and with the donation from the community. We needed a fiscal partner. This is a very complex process with lots of different partners and different opportunities to play different roles at different time, and the city is able to play that role as accepting those dollars as a fiscal agent, through the health community. And if you would refer, again, I would encourage you, if you like data or any more information, to go to the county website. The Community Triage Center link is on there, and we have our phased part of the concept report. It's the different phases, and we're trucking right along with that phase. So phase 2 is really this beginning part of 2019. Travis is not only coming to help with operational expertise because staff time is low, but also this is the first time, one of the first times we've done this sort of project with so many partners before. And since it is a gap in our community, we haven't done this type of work either. So it's really good to have that national expertise. The contract length is for 9 months. What we explained to Travis and his organization is the first 3 months will be very intense, the next 3 less, and then hopefully the last 3 will be the most less intense. We're tracking with the phased approach, by the end of 2019, we'd be able to identify what a pilot would look like. So as far as, each partner around the table that would be able to step up and see this implement, depending on but everyone has a different fiscal year, and depending on what type of partner you play in the future will depend on, what budget cycle and what that looks like for each partner. But for a timeline, we're hoping to have kind of an RFP or an operational plan from Travis and all of the focus groups and everybody by the end of the summer. And then that will give the community leaders the opportunity to really, those next few months, identify how to make that happen with, this is how we can pilot it by the end of this calendar year.
Think that, got it, thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
And you can probably answer this, I suppose, Aaron. This is a really exciting project. The question I was going to have, well, the first one was going to be what encompasses implementation as far as a plan, but then Director Franken mentioned oversight, structural governance, and operating agreement. So would that mean we're going to get into some of the nuts and bolts? Because one of the things that the big question out there is how much and who pays for it. Yeah. That's one of is it going to get in, because are these things going to start to get into some of that as far as like operating agreement? To me, sounds like determining cost shares between entities and things like that.
So we're not only building the plane as we fly, we're also constructing the wings and the wheels and the seats and who's going to be in those seats. So you're exactly right. That's why we're hoping to bring in some national expertise, not only about the governance structure and the funding structure, but what they're actually funding. Travis and his organization has helped with operations, so we will get into those nuts and bolts. And there's some complex issues like how do you bill, what do you bill, and what does that mean, that we'll be able to work out, bring in some outside resources, and really, it's not only what the operational budget is, but how much that means that each entity needs to come up with to make a pilot happen, so yes.
Okay, and obviously this is complicated and there's more pieces to it, but are some of the things like our joint things such as our library and museum, are those going to be where we have county pays part and we pay part, going to already give us a bit of a little idea of how we can make something like this go?
Right, you're exactly right. We have Metro 911, we have a lot of different collaborations between governments. So we'll be able to use that as a basis, but now we're also instituting the private sector. So P3, I found out that's a term I learned, and it's public-private partnership. So it's one thing to have a partnership, but then when you have public funding and private funding, it can easily get complex about how those are spent down. For a pilot to operate, we're going to need, at least $3 to $5 million bare minimum, and to make that happen might be public and private together. So we're going to be looking at not just intergovernmental collaboration and operations, but also bringing in those private partners. So we do have some infrastructure and partnerships to kind of model off locally. And one thing we're recognized for nationally is leadership capacity and our willingness to roll our sleeves up and figure out a way to get it done.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you for being here, all three of you. Appreciate it. The next item up is elections ordinance. Councilor Janet Brecky.
ready to proceed. We didn't have a chance to get together beforehand.
Please introduce yourself for the record. I know we know you, but just have to do that.
Councilmember Janet Brecky, Councilmember at Large for the City of Sioux Falls, and I'm presenting to you today an issue which I would describe as, I believe, having a two-part solution. And so I'm going to be bringing forth to you the issue of city council elections. And what you have above you now is or what you have in front of you now is the proposal that I'm bringing. And the proposal is to return the council election process back to a 34% plurality vote as being the determinative factor for electing city council members. The reason that I have elected to raise this issue is that I believe that its time has come for two things to happen, and that's why I see it as having a two-part solution. First of all, we need to act on an ordinance as a placeholder, and I've done some research, and I'd like to share that with the council, all the things that I've looked at, and have, my intent is to try to have a very intellectual debate on this issue. The more we talk about our own personal experiences, the more difficult it gets. But it is our job to engage in the best government practices. And I think that if we frame our discussion around that, we'll make good decisions. And so to begin that, what I did was take a look at, the original charter election ordinance, which was back in 1994, and that provided for a plain plurality. And the purpose of that provision was to really get the thing started. And it was just kind of it allowed us to make temporary regulations as a council, as a body. And then it was providing for the staggering. What they were trying to do is set it up so that, you wouldn't have a whole council overturn at one time. So they actually provided for the staggering, which we now enjoy, where the 4 council goes over and then, 4 more come on and that sort of thing. So those races are staggered. And the interesting thing is that it did start out in that first election with just a general plurality, and there was no percentage. So then if you go to the next one, then I'm going to just talk a little bit about that election history, that election ordinance history. So in 94, we had the original simple plurality, and that's what dictated the election of the first council candidates under this form of government. Then in 1998, that's when the city actually, through the council, took action and amended the general plurality, or created this new ordinance that was now to govern it with a 34% plurality to be elected as a city council member. I was present when this happened, and when I was working with the council to implement, the charter and to put a permanent election process in place, I remember meeting with my staff, and we were wondering why the charter drafters thought it was wise to have the mayor be elected by majority of 50+1 and the council to be elected by plurality. And so we did make contact with the original drafters. I can't tell you which ones. I think it was Bill Peterson. It was either Bill Peterson, Dale Froelich, or Joe Kirby. Those are the 3 that we usually contacted. And they explained that the reason for the plurality was so that it would encourage more people to run, that it would involve less runoffs, which meant less cost. And since it was a part-time position, they believed, a plurality vote was sufficient to elect them, and they wanted to encourage a broad range of candidates to engage in the process. So they very definitely had discussed it. They clearly understood what they were doing, and that was what, the background of that was. So that definitely had an influence on that original decision in 1998 to put in the procedure that was put in at the 34%. I do believe that also some of the discussion at that time, there was a concern with the simple plurality in that there would certainly be while there wouldn't be runoffs, there would certainly be possibilities if you had 6 candidates or something during an election where someone could win by a really, really small margin. And I think that is why they determined that there should be a threshold, and that threshold eventually became the 34%. And then going on further, then the final change, was made in 2017. Ordinance 8717 was amended to require a majority to elect a council member. So then I took a look at that and just wanted to look at what the impact of that was, because I think it's important. And if you look at that, and I've got Tom here because it's his graph, and I had to be walked through it, so I think I can answer most questions, but if I can't, he can. And basically what this does show, I mean, the 2 points that I guess I was trying to make for purposes of this slide was that it does create more runoffs. It's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, if you have 50 plus 1, there's going to be more runoffs. And it would, if you look at our past election history and apply the 50% rule to it, there were more runoffs. There would have been more runoffs, and then there would likely to be more runoffs in the future. And so that was the purpose of this slide. I think it ends up being there would have been 3 more runoffs, in the history. The next slide is is kind of the history of the amendment and how it evolved. And again, as I looked over this, what I found was, and what I'm able to ascertain was that the City Council was in the process of updating its election ordinance to make it mirror state law, which is what has been the practice, since the charter was developed, was that they would follow state law election procedures with minor modifications that they can do from time to time with home rule. But for general purposes, the pattern and practice has been, and the desire had been of the council to follow state law election process. So as I understand it, there was some cleanup ordinances that were proposed as a result of some cleanup legislation that was done at the state level. And the purpose of this slide is to show just, how complicated that document looked like. There was 6 pages of technical corrections that really were not, as I understand it, were not substantive. And so what happened then is there was an amendment proposed which was very substantive, and that was the amendment to change the election procedure. And that there was a lengthy debate, but all of the debate evolved around the amendment. And there was a 4-4 vote, and the mayor broke the tie. So when I studied this, what I thought about and what I want to share with the council and why I'm bringing it back is, to me, and this is how, how I believe this, and this is how I treated it, when I had responsibility for it at a previous time, and that is, the city council's responsibility in the manner of elections, in the manner of finances, and there's also a section in the charter on investigations where the city council has extremely strong power. And that is, to me, that is our most sacred trust, those areas. Those areas are the place where, we are really, we really have to engage ourselves in the most objective fashion and make our decision based on lots of outside input, studies of history, studies of what other cities are doing, and really, really try hard to make an intellectual, objective decision. And when I looked at this procedure and how it came down, it didn't feel like that really happened at that time. And I was really, so I wanted to do that this time. And so I want to go through, the things that we've looked at. That, we can just kind of wait on that one. The things that we've looked at, that I've looked at, is I had some research done on what other cities do. That's where I always start. What do other cities do? And it's kind of all over the board. So sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not. But I gave you that background. I think you emailed that to them, didn't you?
It's on SIRE.
Okay, it's on SIRE. So if you want to look at that, you can look at it. I actually interviewed the drafters of the charter. Again, I talked to Dale Froelich, Joe Kirby, I've got a coffee set with Pauline Paulettis and Bill Peterson. And again, talked about that plurality. And then, just again, with my own experience and talking to other folks to fill in the blanks, I was trying to find out why, what was the momentum for the 50+1 change. And it appeared to be that it was, it was a deviation from the charter. There wasn't like a lot of people scrambling and saying that this needed to be changed. Clearly, the charter drafters, they have actually a different feeling about it now. They're in a mixed bag. They would actually say, some of them would say, go back to the original plurality, the simple plurality. And so I offer that. If someone wanted to offer a friendly amendment to go back to a simple plurality, I think that would be a good idea too. Absent that, I still think, again with my own personal history and what I've researched and talking to people, that the 34% was really working just fine. I've yet to find any complaints about it, any council members that were complaining about it, any members of the public that were dissatisfied about it. There was no dissatisfaction of it. And so, that's, again, one of the reasons why I'm bringing it forward again. I think it was a good procedure. Again, it was rooted at the very basis in the charter at its inception, and there was really no rational reason that I can find for why it had to be changed and why it was changed the way it was. So again, I'm bringing it back not to criticize that happened, but just to engage you in a debate on the issue and make sure that a lot of public people do know about this. I've emailed these charter members. You'll probably be hearing from some of them, and I'm going to be emailing some other folks saying, hey, if you got some advice on this, please bring it forward. The other thing that we looked at, is, and again, when engaging in something like this, one of the things I like to do, and I'd like to engage you folks in this too, and I'll answer your questions about it, is look at various hypotheticals. Study, what the possible outcomes could be, and are those outcomes so that you don't have unexpected outcomes. One of the good ways to kind of do that is to spin that around. And I will give you some of the hypothetical situations that I have, bounced off, like the charter revision drafters and Mayor Rick Noby. And these are some of the things that we came up with when I was talking to them about it. If you have an election, a council election in a mayoral race, there's going to be a bigger turnout. So, if there's a bigger turnout, and if you have a large race, let me just wait. I can't remember what I was thinking there. Okay, if elections with mayoral race, you're going to have a larger turnout. So then, if you have your decisions made by runoffs, it's not what I was thinking. I'm going to back up. I'm going to go to number 3 and work up number 1. I can't remember what I was trying to say. What you have is a potential for is in an election when there's not a mayoral race. You have a potential for a race like Kurt was in, you had 6 people running, and without a mayoral candidate in that race, you have a chance where, I think a real good chance, a real viable chance that you could have a runoff, and so you'd have to host a city election for a single runoff in a single district. And I think that's a real live possibility. Because if you don't have a mayoral candidate running, you'll have a lower voter turnout, and there's a real likelihood that could happen. All you have to need is a high number of candidates, and you're going to be hosting a citywide election. And then in that race, if there's not a lot of interest generated by the mayoral race, the likelihood that a lot of candidates will show up for a small district election to actually elect the person, you're going to have a real likely possibility that just a handful of people are going to show up and actually elect that person in that runoff. So I think that's a concern. The other hypothetical that we talked about was, if the mayor is an incumbent. If you have an incumbent race, I think our history has shown that it's happened on occasion that, and not unusually, it's happened that, you know, a mayor will win by the 50 plus 1%, you know, when he's an incumbent. And then again, you could still have the situation where the mayoral race is done, he's won, but now you still have to have a runoff election, you know, for a single district, or, you know, maybe one or two districts where the interest has receded, and the number of people that show up are usually, those are angry or highly committed, you know, and so you have a strange outcome where you're going to get people elected by a very low turnout. I still can't remember what my first one was, so if I think of it, I'll come back to you. But I think it's important to do that, to think about what those potential outcomes in your regular situations are. When we have a race like the one we just did, you do have a high voter turnout, so it's not that big of a deal to throw in a runoff election with it, because we had a runoff election with the mayor too. But, you know, there's certainly a lot of situations that will happen. I don't think this is something that, you know, is like in the obscure. I mean, it's going to happen that we're going to find ourselves at some point with a 50 plus 1 with just having a city election hosted for just one district after the mayoral race is over. And so I think that, you know, that's that was very persuasive to me. I think that's something we'd like to avoid. I think it would be kind of embarrassing. And so, you know, and then I turn back to, you know, what the original charter drafters were saying, and I haven't found anything to me that's more persuasive than what they were saying. There's a good justification, you know, behind why they elected then to have the mayoral race be different from the council race. So I had started out this by saying that my intent was to bring an issue that I saw the solution being two parts. And so now I'd like you to flip up the charter history. I see the two parts being that the council adopts a position now as a placeholder ordinance. And I am recommending to you that we return it to the 34%, because there was no problem with it, there was no movement to change it. It's consistent with our original charter history and our charter intent, and I think it would be a good holding ordinance. But having reviewed with you the history and how things have happened, and having spoken to most of you, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to talk to all of you. I've talked to most of you about it. There's a real strong level of discomfort on the council in dealing with this issue. And, you know, I understand that, and I think there was some concern originally, you know, that the council members were uncomfortable doing it. I'm suggesting that we do it because it's our job right now, and it has been brought to the charter revision, and they refused it. But I think that the time is ripe, because of the current history now, to bring it back to the charter revision after we adopt a placeholder position and suggest that they take a holistic review of it. And that would be my second part solution, and that would be my intent. I've actually notified the Charter Revision Commission that I will be, and asked to be placed on their agenda, and I will be bringing four issues, you know, I will be bringing four alternatives to them, and I will be asking them to address the election process for council issue. And I will be bringing a simple plurality, a 34% plurality, the 50 plus 1 majority, and ranked choice voting, which happens to be my favorite. By voting for this, I want to make it clear in my overall position so that I'm not viewed as contradicting myself later. I think this is a good placeholder. There wasn't anything wrong with it. There really wasn't any reason, objective reason, I think, for change it, or intellectual reason for changing it. And so I'd like to see go back to that and have that be there. Part of the reason I'd like to do that is when I would bring this to the Charter Revision Commission, a study, you know, of those four options, and particularly ranked choice voting. If they elect to sink their teeth into that and really learn and study it, it's going to take time, and I don't want them to have to hurry. I want them to just take their time, and even if they have a proposal for the next election or the one after that, doesn't concern me. They have a right to have a delayed implementation. So if they were to implement, something again more complex or completely different, like ranked choice voting, they could actually delay, they could recommend an ordinance revision that the people voted on that had a delayed implementation date. So I'm hoping that they will be receptive to looking at it now. And this is part of what I'm going to use in my presentation to them to attempt to persuade them that it's timely to take a look at it. If you look at this charter amendment summary, and I think, Teresa, you might have had this done. I'm not sure where I got it. I have down there that was presented to the Charter Revision Commission, and it was prepared by the city clerk's office. But I'm not exactly sure where I got it, but Tom assures me it was prepared by the city's clerk's office, but he doesn't remember presenting it to the Charter Revision Commission. But what it was a study of charter amendments. And I remember whatever meeting I was at when I picked it up, I was still on the campaign trail, and I thought, this is really great. For me, it was something I was excited about because I could actually see, what changes were made to the charter over the years I was there and the years I was not there. And I will tell you, on the 1996 through 2004, all of those amendments that were made were run through the city attorney's office. Now, I can't say all of the council members, except for possibly the council members. Sometimes council members ran them through our office, sometimes they did not. But it was our responsibility to funnel through what was going to the Charter Revision Commission, and whether it was worthy of a charter revision or whether it was something that could just be done by ordinance. And so that was part of what we were screening it for. And when we did that, what we were using to screen that for was we were explaining to the people, the people in City Hall and the public, often because there's sometimes ones that came from citizens, was that the charter is our constitution. And it's not like a contract that you tweak or you wordsmith or you do any of those things to. It's our constitution. The changes should be few. They should be absolutely necessary. There should be a real serious substantive reason for them. But I would tell you, the reason there's so many in those early years is because exactly that. We just implemented it. And one of the things we would do in our office is we'd just kind of watch how much problem something was causing. Does it really need a charter revision? And if it kept coming back and it kept coming back, or if it was just clearly absent, the charter didn't speak on something it really needed to speak on, then that's when we'd say, okay, that needs to be a charter revision. And then, some of them were brought through various departments, and some of them were brought directly by the city attorney's office and the mayor's office, and again, some of them were brought by the city council. And I think this is one of those issues. It's only natural for me to look at this issue that way. There was some confusion early on. There was some debate whether it should be simple plurality or not, and then there was a change to it, and then and every time it's been changed, including the last time, there was always a lot of the debate and discussion tended to evolve around personal experiences. And it was difficult for the council then, and it's difficult today for the council to put on their objective hat because because of the situation that they're in. And so I think at this time, because of that history, and in the last attempt to bring it to the Charter Revision Commission, when they denied it, I happened to be at that meeting. And Teresa was bringing forth a proposal, Teresa and Greg were bringing forth a proposal, and Rex Rolfing was bringing forth a proposal. Both parts of the council wanted different things cemented in the council. Rex wanted the 50+1 cemented in the council, and Teresa and Greg, preferred the 34%. That, along with what I'm asking you to do right now, I think, shows the charter revision that we are kind of in turmoil over this, and we would really like them to handle it. And so I'm hopeful that they will take it this time. I'm going to intend to show them this. The other thing I would just point out to the council is that, there's only one amendment that actually failed. So the Charter Commission has been and appears still is, a very appropriate body, does really good work, and when they sink their teeth into an issue, I think its history has shown they do a really good job. And of the amendments that I know they made, I think they were appropriate. So I'm hopeful that they will take it on. And I know that, some of the drafters I've been talking to are willing to step up with me and assist me in bringing it forward to them. So that's the work I've done so far. That's why I've proposed it as a two-part, because what I want to do is to present it to you in such a way that you can do your job, because right now it is your job, but it's always hard to do this job when you have an election in front of you or even one just behind you. But I felt I was the appropriate one to bring it because I was able to be successful under the 50-plus one, although I'm highly critical of it. And I don't have anything, for the next several years. And I'm comfortable, trying to present the entire issue in a holistic way to the charter. And so I was comfortable doing this. I appreciate the work that Greg did on it. He was, and I hope it's okay for me to share it. He did the work, but he was concerned about his own position. And so I've stepped up, and I'm recommending 34%. I do think that's the best one. I don't mind if people would go to a straight plurality. If you really want to sink your teeth into the concept that there should be no runoffs, that's how you get no runoffs. But if you have 6 candidates, somebody could win by 12%. If you're okay with that, I'm okay with that. I think runoffs are costly. I think it's difficult to be involved in a runoff, especially if you're in a district, because it's hard to even be able to find your audience. I'm looking at Kurt as I'm doing this because, you live in the district, but when you're a citywide race like I was in, you can go to Lions Club and you can go to these people to try to engage, but it's certainly more challenging in the district. And the idea that you could end up having, a whole citywide election produced just for an outcome in a small district where the turnout would likely be very low, because there's just not a lot of interest in the council races, unfortunately, unless they're paired with a mayoral race. So the final slide then is just, I guess, the timeline. I'm bringing before you the plurality at 34% to you now. I'm ready to take any questions you've got. I'm going to, again, I've already notified the charter revision of what's coming, and I'm working on a presentation to make them. And as I understand, I think it's in May that they'll be seated. So, any questions?
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for Councillor Brecky? Councillor Staley.
I have a question for Tom Greco. Tom, just for the record, and I have this written down down someplace, but just the ballpark figure for runoffs I have down is $80,000.
That's correct.
Okay, and that would apply whether it's a central district or at large?
No, it wouldn't. So if it was at large, it would be citywide, so it would generally be that amount. But if it was, say, one district, if there were no at-large races involved, just districts, you could assume 1/5 of that cost for a district level race.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it. We will move to the next portion of public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to speak? Please state your name for the record, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Scott Harrisman, Sioux Falls. I thought it was a mistake to change this to begin with. I guess I kind of agree that this is something that the citizens should vote on, but since we made the mistake of changing this, I think it's the council's responsibility to change it back and then maybe bring it to the citizens to vote on. But I will say this, nobody in the community said anything about wanting to change this. Nobody. This was the idea of 2 city councilors who are no longer here. It's time to change it back. I find it a little ironic that they found when their argument was it was so important to have a city councilor get at least a majority, even though with a runoff you're not really getting a majority, you're getting a fake majority because it's probably getting less votes than you did in the general. But when we had the event center vote, That wasn't even a legal vote. That was an advisory vote for a $115 million building. If it would have been a legal vote, an actual bond election like the school district just had, it would have failed by 2%. There would have never been an event center. So I find it a little ironic that it's important that part-time city councilors need to get 51% of the vote, but a $115 million event center, oh, we'll just do this fake election and we'll let the city council pass it later. So let's look at some priorities here, change it back. You were talking earlier about the whole transportation thing, and I think it'd be wise to bring in our health systems in on this discussion, not just for the triage center, but for the transportation portion. I've felt for a long time that we could get a lot more assistance from the federal government if the hospitals were helping out with the transportation with paratransit and stuff like that through Medicare reimbursement, etc. Same way with the triage center. I mean, our health systems are building basketball stadiums, golf bars, other bars, restaurants, you know. Why don't they take some of that money and actually bring it back to the community in actually helping with some of our issues we're having? Always comes back to the taxpayers for all this stuff when they have the power and the resources to do this stuff and the power and the resources to get federal reimbursement for it. And that's another thing, we're always scared to take any money from the feds. Well, it's our money. We all pay income taxes to the federal government. It's our money. There's nothing wrong with taking it back. So I'd really like to see the healthcare systems get brought to the table. You know, they always are here when they want streets closed or they want to tear down houses, and we're always there fighting for them for development and bulldozing neighborhoods, but we're never ever trying to get them, encouraging them to come here and to help us out with our issues. And one more thing that was discussed when it came to the transportation plan, you know, was the transit system. I got to tell you, I've been hearing a lot of talk from a lot of citizens asking me the same question. Who is Bloomberg? What is their role in the whole thing? How are they having our mayor decide what he's doing? Why are they involved with the transit plan? I've had tons of citizens come to me and say, why aren't they having actual citizens from the community who use the transit system and are sitting on these task force? Why are we using some group from Chicago and some group from New York City? And on top of it, we don't even know what they do. Nobody does. I had to laugh one day. I was looking at the mayor's Facebook page, and he had a picture of the Bloomberg Institute on his screen, and he was studying what his chief of staff is supposed to do. Who is Bloomberg? We still haven't been told. We have no idea. We know that he's made several trips and taken several classes, but we have no idea what it is. It's about time someone from the administration came and did a presentation about the influence of Bloomberg. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I have no idea what it is. I have no idea what they're telling us to do. Because as I will talk later tonight, the 5G rollout is a prime example about outside influencing our government. Thank you.
Any other public input? Seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting. We'll see you at 7 p.m. Thank you.